Good morning. My name is Jason Coyle, Operations Section Chief for Southwest Area Team 1. Today is June 17th, and this is your morning operational update for the north zone of the Calf Canyon and Hermits Peak fire. So last night, actually, we did not get an infrared flight. The reason was that the weather prevented their sensors from being able to detect the heat on the ground, and simply put, there's clouds. When there's clouds, that water vapor absorbs the heat as it comes up, and then their sensors aren't able to detect the heat. What we did get yesterday during the day, and it was the basis of the very ugly drawing I made, if you watch that afternoon update, was a flight from an aircraft with a sensor that could take infrared pictures, and we could tile them together and make a perimeter. So it's not as accurate as the NIROPS, they call it, our nighttime infrared program, but it is the best we got. And so the perimeter then, based on that imagery, which was taken at about 1,300 yesterday, is how we arrived at that 340,980 acres. So the fire is still 72% contained, and there's 2,279 personnel assigned to the incident. So as most of you are probably aware, there was some precipitation over the fire last night, and that's, I think the amount of precipitation we got, based on the reports I have heard so far, hadn't led to any issues. We know it hadn't led to any issues on the north zone as far as with flooding or debris flows. So, that's great. That's a good day. And it also has added some complexity to our environment. One of the branch directors, so the people that work for the operations section chiefs, when we had our nighttime call last night at about 9 o'clock, he texted me afterwards and he said, "Hey, are we complicated or complex now?" And I remember the complicated thing is just if somebody's gonna fix your watch is complicated, but if you know how to fix watches, you can fix it. Whereas a complex thing, you don't understand the way different pieces react, that kind of deal. So I was thinking about it, I was like, man, this is probably the most complex this incident has been since we got here. And so I was gonna take a minute to explain to you why we think that and what we're doing to prepare that. And because I think some of this is also useful for those of you that are dealing with this problem from your own perspective. And so that's kind of what I've tried to do yesterday, and then what I'm gonna try to do again today is tell you how we're applying things and tell how the application of that may be useful to you while you deal with what you're going to have to deal with today and in the coming days from the effects of this fire. So the first part of that is think about critical thinking, and people, at least in our world, will say lots of times, hey, think critically. We need to make sure that we're applying critical thinking, but that doesn't really say much, right? Because that's just like telling people, hey, make sure you do a good job. So the definition I like of is deliberate and conscious appropriate application of reflective skepticism. So deliberate, right? We're purposeful about going out and applying that assessment of a problem, and then appropriate. So we don't treat one situation that may have some similarities, but the differences are more what we should be concerned about. We don't treat them as the same and think, oh, that worked there, it's going to work here. And conscious, so it's purposeful. We're actually engaged in a process. We're not just seeing what happens. And then of reflective skepticism. So the way that we apply that reflective skepticism is we look at what we think the problem is, we invite different points of view, and then we take a skeptical approach to determine what the best course of action is. And that process, it's not necessarily a linear process. We don't go like step by step by step, but those are all the different components that should take place as we're going through the process. And so why I share that with you is that our planning process, you could take our planning process, matter of fact, there's this thing called the planning P, and it starts at the bottom of the P and it goes up around, and you could go do this, do that, do this, do that, and you get all the way around it. And when you know exactly what the problem is, and you know exactly what it is that you need to do to solve the problem, it's a good process. If you're going to make widgets in a factory, or you're going to plan a Christmas party or something else, you could use that planning P to tell you exactly how to do it. What's different right now that we need to pay attention to, we are paying attention to, is that is a linear process when the problem is clearly defined and is knowable. And so the problems that we're facing today, and that you guys are going to face through at least this summer, are that fire that's down in the Pecos Wilderness. I'll show you where it is on the map, but it grew a lot. It grew over 5,000 acres. I would call that a lot. And it moved west into terrain that is difficult to access. There's limited control options in that country, and there's a lot of dead trees. Looking at some of the aerial flights yesterday, every bit of a third, maybe 50% of the trees that were standing were dead. And so that country it's gonna be hard for fire to get put out there, no matter how much rain you get, because it can hide under a log, and then you get a drying trend, things like that. So that reflective skepticism, part of what informs my skepticism about this being a done deal, is that looking back historically, these false starts to the monsoons, lots of times we'd have drying, and sometimes we had drying where we got all the way up to the 90th percentile of the conditions that we experienced during the year, during that period before the actual onset of the monsoons. I love what the weather's saying. That doesn't look like that's what's going to happen, but that's one of the things that we're on the lookout for. And so that contributes greatly to our ability to define the problem. If we could say, hey, it started raining, it's going to keep raining, the fire isn't going to move, our problem would look very different. If we were saying it's not raining and it stopped raining and it's not going to rain again for another 2 weeks, then the problem would look very different. So since we don't have either one of those, then it gets a little bit more challenging as we're going through this. So there's one more part of this that I want to explain to you about what we're doing, and that is when our planning process and the environment we're going to face right now aren't necessarily useful. And that's when we're faced with something that we need to have a quicker response to. And that is when I shouldn't say our planning process isn't useful, but going in there and going through that deliberate process of critical thinking probably isn't the best call, because that could cause you harm. And this goes all the way back to the way, way back in the day when we were trying to get things on the Serengeti plain. If all of a sudden you see the grass moving a little bit different, and you're wondering why that grass is moving different, so you go through this critical assessment process to determine why the grass is moving different, and then the lion or tiger that's out there, or saber-toothed tiger that's running through the grass eats you, then probably not the right time to take a moment to think deeply about the problem. And there's going to be some of those moments today too. And that's when we will apply heuristics, and heuristics are basically just shortcuts. And so some of the shortcuts today that we're going to apply are, if there is flooding that is crossing the road, if it's covering the road, we don't go through it. If there's debris flows across the road, we don't go through it. We know they're going to subside. We know that we can call and get personnel to come help us. So we're choosing not to make the assumption that it's only going to be up to the middle of my tires, I'll be fine. Or that debris doesn't look that deep, I won't get stuck. Or a big boulder won't come down after all the mud that came across the road. So we're applying those heuristics in those situations. And we've talked about them this morning, and I would ask that y'all talk about them too, and make sure that everybody in your family knows about what those conditions are. Hey, if I don't come home, I'm not going to drive across the floodplain. I'm not going to drive across the debris flow. I will wait on the other side. If I'm stuck between it, I may not have cell phone, so I'm going to go to high ground. I'm going to make sure that I'm safe. So don't worry. That's what I'm going to do in this bad situation. And if you can't get a hold of me, don't come driving through the debris flow to come looking for me. You see what I'm saying? So it's not necessarily that applies in all conditions about the planning that we're going through to deal with the problem. There's other times when you just got to make some absolutes and determine how you're going to react to those absolutes, and then share that information so everybody's on the same page, and they stay out of harm's way. I don't know. Hopefully that helped a little bit. I'll go to the map now and tell you guys what we've got going on today. All right, we'll start with repair because I always do them last. Over here on the northeast side, As you can see, we got the green all the way up across the top of the peak there between Chacon and then the Guadalupe where the 434 road comes down. A lot of good progress going north here. Again, if I say good progress, I mean the work that they have identified is being completed as they move north. Inevitably, every time they get two things checked off their list, someone from the public will come in and identify something else that needs to be done, which is fine. We're happy to get it done. It makes projections difficult for how long it's going to take us to complete an area, because we make those projections based on what is known. And then when you add that extra work, sometimes our progress gets delayed. So we're thinking right now in a couple days we should be able to have the rest of these portions of line completed on the 434 side, right? That's 434. Yep. And so the things that will change that is weather, and then other work that has yet to be identified that's added to the list of things they need to do. Same thing on the west side there, going 121 going down from Chacon. They're continuing to work to the south. It's been slower in this area just south of Chacon, north of Holman, for the reasons I just identified. But that work is ongoing, and their production rates have increased every day, although the amount of work that they've gotten done relative to what we thought as far as progress south goes hasn't been as good as we anticipated. Everything else around the fire yesterday on the north side, from our zone break north, the only piece of activity was a little bit of backing fire on the reburn going beyond Serpent Lake here. And so I just want to tell you why that was reburning. Sometimes what happens is that fire moves through the vegetation, doesn't burn all the tops, but scorches it, and then the leaves or the pine needles will fall off, and then they'll find fuel on the ground, and there'll be enough of them on the ground that the fire can move back through them. And originally I thought that's what was occurring up here, and then I saw pictures of where it was occurring. All the trees, it was a high severity burn area where there was no needles to fall off. And then as we got looking at it more, basically when that fire burned through there's still snow on the ground there to the east of Hickoryta Peak, and the duff layer, the organic material, that's the beginning of peat, if you will, was wet. It was so wet it didn't burn. Since then it dried out. So now when it finds heat, it's able to move through that duff layer. So we're going to keep a really close eye on that, because there's no line here. It is just the fire's edge where we were able to hold it before. None of that reburn has moved beyond the line, but we're going to watch that. And one good thing is that when we're talking about just that duff layer burning, moisture getting down in there, enough moisture where it moistens up all that organic material, that will put that out. So moisture in that area above what we got yesterday would be highly beneficial. All right, the Southern Contingency Line, we're still working on completing that. Everything's going well, and they're making good progress. Same thing up here on the northern line. They're continuing to work to improve the road from the 518 back to the east to allow for some better traffic flows that will increase their production as well. So the rest of what some of the stuff we're working on today is making sure that in our coordination with the south zone on this fire that has now just barely entered the north zone, that we make sure that where we have our arbitrary lines on the map that divide our work, that's the right place, and that it makes sure and it allows for the best coordination and the best access to the different areas that we need to work. So, this fire here that's moved all the way up to the Rita del Padre there to the east of to the Cerrito del Padre. Again, that was at 1 o'clock yesterday. We're not quite sure where it really is. Hopefully we can find out later on today. And they didn't get a bunch of rain, but it's the environment is much moister right now. So what that means is we're not certain really what kind of fire behavior we're going to see in there today. We expect it to be much less than it was yesterday. We also know that outflow winds, along with the general wind direction, are favorable to move the fire to the northwest. And we know that because of the higher humidities, there's calculations we can do. The likelihood of an ember landing and causing another fire is lower, which is really good, because yesterday when I was looking at the imagery that the aircraft took, you could see a lot of spot fires out in front of it, which is no surprise. And when a fire not only burns through the timber as it moves to the, as it moves across the ground, but it also spots in front of itself, then it's able to grow a lot quicker. So just the fact that we're reducing the spotting potential with the higher relative humidity, even absent of rain, is beneficial to slowing down that fire's progression to the north. Combine that with the anticipated weather today, the higher, the uptick of moisture, at least in the long-term forecast from Monday onward, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to keep that fire south of the ridge system. And but again, we'll keep planning for the fact that it will get north, and that we'll be ready for it if that's to happen. All right, with that, it'll be the end of the operational update. Thank you.